At 0442, the first FPV drone entered the sector low from the west, flying under the tree line and using the road itself as a guide. The morning mist still clung to the damp earth, masking the electric hum of its rotors. The target was not the largest vehicle in the convoy. It was the lead truck, approaching a narrow crossing where the road dropped between wet ground on both sides. Bad place to stop, perfect place to block. The FPV came in at windshield height, an unavoidable insect of death. The driver had maybe 2 seconds after the first visual contact, barely enough time to register the dark shape materializing from the gloom. The detonation tore through the front of the vehicle and pushed burning debris across the crossing. Shrapnel shredded the engine block, and the cabin was instantly consumed. The convoy stopped moving. That was enough. The second truck braked hard, its tires locking and sliding on the slick mud. The third cut toward the shoulder and sank into soft ground, its axles immediately bogging down in the deep ruts. Troops started dismounting before anyone gave a clear order, panic overriding discipline. One group ran toward a drainage ditch, seeking the illusion of safety in the muddy depression. Another moved back along the road, straight into the open, their silhouettes stark against the burning wreckage. Above them, the reconnaissance drone stayed in place, an unblinking eye in the pre-dawn sky. Now the reaction was being mapped. Every radio call, every frantic turn, every desperate attempt to reverse was feeding the same picture back to a dimly lit control room miles away. The first strike had not destroyed the convoy. It had forced the convoy to show how it behaves under pressure. That is where the second strike came from. Another FPV drone entered from the south, not toward the burning lead truck, but toward the vehicles trapped behind it. It banked smoothly, guided by a pilot exploiting the sudden chaos. The operator had a cleaner target now, engines idling, doors open, soldiers clustered near the ditch line in disorganized knots, drivers trying to turn heavy vehicles inside a corridor too narrow for recovery, grinding gears in a futile effort to escape. The drone hit the immobilized truck on the shoulder with surgical precision. Fuel spilled into the road, igniting instantly into a rushing river of fire. Ammunition inside the rear compartment began cooking off in short, violent bursts. Tracers snapped sideways into the darkness, not aimed at anyone, just escaping from burning storage boxes like angry fireflies. The convoy was no longer a formation. It was an obstacle. At 0503, the delay reached the front. A Russian unit waiting for ammunition near the forward line did not receive its scheduled resupply. The cold morning air offered no comfort to the men checking their empty magazines. The officers at the trench line did not know why yet. They only knew the trucks had not arrived, and the assault group that was supposed to move before sunrise now had to hold in place. Holding in place sounds simple. It is not. Men remain in known positions longer, exposing themselves to pre-registered artillery. Ammunition stays limited, breeding anxiety. Evacuation vehicles do not arrive on time, leaving the wounded to wait. Commanders start making decisions with missing pieces, guessing at shadows. That is how tempo begins to fail. At 0526, a second Ukrainian drone shifted east and picked up movement around a fuel storage site farther behind the line. The thermal optics painted the heat signatures in stark white against the cool terrain. This was not a frontline position. It was a support node, the lifeblood of the mechanized forces. Fuel tanks, maintenance vehicles, temporary shelters, and 2 trucks moving between a storage berm and a covered service lane. The site had distance. Distance used to matter. Now it was just another coordinate. The drone circled for almost 40 minutes, a silent predator waiting for the perfect alignment. No one fired. Either the crews below never saw it against the graying sky, or they saw it too late and decided not to expose an air defense system for one small UAV. That decision made sense on paper. It failed in practice. At 0611, a fuel truck stopped beside the central transfer point, its heavy suspension settling as the brakes hissed. The attack drone came almost straight down, dropping like a stone. The first explosion hit near the connection between the truck and the storage line. For a moment, there was only fire, a blinding flash that erased the dawn. Then the pressure wave rolled through the site and pushed burning fuel into the drainage channel between the tanks. Crews ran for the northern berm, abandoning hoses and clipboards. Then, the second tank ruptured, ripping the steel casing apart like paper. The fire was now taller than the buildings around it, painting the underbelly of the clouds orange. Vehicles that had been parked under cover began reversing out through smoke with no spacing and no clear route, scraping against concrete barricades. A fire team tried to approach from the west, stopped, then pulled back as radiant heat rolled across the access road, melting the plastic trim on their vehicles. The site was still burning when the reconnaissance drone moved wider. It was not watching the flames anymore. It was watching the response. That is the part crews on the ground cannot hide. Fire trucks arriving from a secondary depot, their sirens wailing uselessly. Command vehicles stopping outside the danger area, antennas bristling, maintenance teams pulling equipment toward another covered location 2 kilometers away. The strike had exposed the next layer, peeling back the camouflage of the rear echelon. At 0648, a Russian short-range air defense crew near the rail line received reports of drones deeper than expected. The radio chatter was tense, filled with static and overlapping warnings. The commander kept the radar off. That was the correct instinct. A radar that transmits becomes a point on somebody else's screen, a beacon screaming for attention. But more drones kept appearing. One from the northwest, one from the south, another higher above the road net, barely moving, just watching. Cheap drones, slow drones, the kind you do not want to waste expensive missiles on, the kind you also cannot ignore, because they see everything. Inside the air defense vehicle, the crew had a choice: breathing the stale, air-conditioned air of their armored box, stay silent, and let the drones continue into the rear, ravaging the supply lines, or activate, build a track, and risk becoming the next target. At 0652, the radar came on. 3 sweeps, maybe 4. The rhythmic hum of the transmitter filled the cabin. That was all it took. The emission was detected, fixed, and passed into the strike chain before the crew finished repositioning. The digital handshake took milliseconds. The vehicle started moving under the trees, but the massive engine heat made it stand out through the canopy like a flare on infrared. The FPV drone arrived while it was still turning, tearing through the branches. The impact did not need to destroy the entire system. It damaged the delicate radar section and forced the crew out into the dirt. Nearby air defense elements shut down almost immediately or moved without transmitting, paralyzed by the sudden loss of their node. A gap opened. Not a permanent gap, just long enough. More Ukrainian drones pushed through the sector at low altitude, using the dead space created by the silent radars like a highway. Now the targets changed. Not trucks, not infantry. Rear infrastructure, repair points, drone preparation shelters, communications relays, possible missile support sites. The air defense layer had not collapsed everywhere. It had thinned in the wrong place at the wrong time. That is how modern drone operations expand. It is a deadly algorithm. One strike blocks a convoy. Convoy exposes a route. The route points to a supply node. The supply node response reveals a depot. The depot draws air defense activity. The air defense system activates and gives away its position. Each action creates the next target, a cascading failure of the defensive network. By 0720, Russian movement across the sector was visibly slowing. The arteries of the front line were clogging. Trucks were no longer using the main road in pairs. They were moving alone or waiting under tree cover, their engines off to mask their thermal signature. Infantry stopped crossing open ground in groups, creeping along hedgerows instead. Vehicles parked farther apart, scattering across fields. Radios carried shorter transmissions, clipped and paranoid. The battlefield was adapting. Adaptation costs time. A unit that moves in 10 minutes now waits 30. A truck that could drive straight now detours through broken farm roads, churning through deep mud. A radar crew that could scan continuously now transmits in short bursts and relocates after each one, exhausting the operators. Everything still functions, just slower. And slower is enough to lose an engagement. At 0744, an FPV drone found 3 soldiers moving between a trench entrance and a damaged building near the rear edge of the forward zone. They were not part of a convoy. They were not manning a launcher. They were just moving, carrying rations or messages. That was enough to mark them for death. The first drone missed, striking the ground behind them and throwing a geyser of dirt across the trench lip. 2 men dropped into cover, pressing their faces into the soil. The third ran toward the building and disappeared through a side door, his boots slipping on the rubble. The reconnaissance drone stayed overhead, circling like a vulture. It marked the doorway. For the next 15 minutes, nothing happened. The dust settled. Then, 2 more soldiers arrived at the same building carrying heavy equipment boxes. One looked up before entering, scanning the gray sky. But by then, the pattern was already clear. The building was not random cover. It was a rally point, a node of human logistics. The second FPV hit. As the door opened again, the blast punched through the entrance and filled the lower floor with acrid gray smoke. A figure appeared at the rear window, hesitated as if evaluating the drop, then dropped back inside to unknown horrors. A third drone came in from the opposite side and hit the courtyard wall where troops were trying to exit, showering them with fragmented brick. The building stopped functioning as cover. That changes how soldiers move in profound ways. A trench protects against shell fragments, but it does not hide the path into it. A building blocks line of sight, but it does not erase the moment someone enters or leaves. A A tree line gives shade, not invisibility. The sky was now tracking transitions. Cover to movement, movement to shelter, shelter to regrouping point to strike. There was nowhere left to hide. By mid-morning, the pressure had spread into the command network. Reports from different units no longer described one battle. They described the same systemic problem appearing everywhere at once, overwhelming the operators at brigade headquarters. Convoy delayed, fuel site burning, radar damaged, drone overhead, route unsafe, medical evacuation postponed. No single event broke the system. The timing did. The relentless, synchronized pressure was unspooling their operational plans. A frontline unit waiting for ammunition could still fight, but not at the planned rate of fire. A fuel depot could still be replaced, but not before the next movement cycle stalled out. An air defense battery could still reposition, but not while maintaining full, overlapping coverage. Infantry could still move, but every movement now risked drawing deadly observation. The rear had become part of the contact zone. The mechanical safety buffer that traditionally separated the supply terminals from the fighting units had evaporated entirely under a continuous stream of low-altitude threats that ignored physical distance and geographical barriers. At 10:28, Ukrainian drones began probing deeper again through the corridor opened by the damaged air defense coverage. The hive was swarming. One feed picked up a group of vehicles near a concealed maintenance area, their camouflage nets unable to mask the hot engines beneath. Another showed traffic entering a covered compound linked to drone support operations. A third tracked a heavy truck moving from the fuel site response area toward a hardened underground storage location. The system was trying to repair itself, like white blood cells rushing to a wound. That repair process was visible. This is where the operation shifted from strike to exploitation. The first targets had been immediate: vehicles, fuel, radar. The next targets were functional, places that allowed future attacks, future movement, future recovery. A workshop is not as dramatic as a burning tank, but if it keeps vehicles functioning, it matters immensely. A fuel transfer point is not a frontline trench, but if armored units depend on it to maneuver, it becomes part of the immediate battle plan. A radar vehicle sitting silent under netting is not firing, but if it has to activate to protect the rear, it becomes vulnerable the moment it does its job. By 11:15, Russian commanders were no longer trying to restore the old rhythm. They were trying to prevent the new rhythm from breaking more of the system, playing a desperate game of damage control. Movement windows were shortened to mere minutes. Vehicles were dispersed across miles of woodland. Air defense crews were ordered to limit emissions to the absolute bare minimum. Supply routes were split into smaller, inefficient packets. That reduces losses. It also severely reduces flow. A convoy broken into single vehicles is harder to destroy, but infinitely easier to delay. A radar that stays quiet survives longer, but protects less airspace, leaving the troops below naked. Infantry moving one at a time are harder to target, but agonizingly slower to reinforce a crumbling position. Every defensive adjustment had a structural cost that drained operational energy from the front, bleeding the army's momentum dry. The drones were forcing Russia to pay that cost before the next strike even landed. At 12:36, another FPV drone hit a vehicle moving alone on a secondary dirt road. One truck, one blast, no large convoy behind it, but the reconnaissance drone above the road watched the reaction with cold patience. A recovery vehicle came out 30 minutes later, its crane swaying as it navigated the craters. Then a security team dismounted to secure the perimeter. Then a command vehicle stopped at the intersection and remained there for 6 minutes. 6 minutes was enough to mark the junction as a tactical node. The next strike did not hit the smoldering wreck. It hit the recovery team. That is the loop. Strike the movement. Watch the response. Strike the response. Wait for the system to reveal what it still needs. Every recovery asset sent to clear a path simply became the anchor point for the next tactical trap, transforming the logic of assistance into a vulnerability loop where attempting to help only bred more casualties. By afternoon, the rear area was no longer behaving like a rear area. Roads had empty stretches where traffic should have been steady and flowing. Fuel movement was irregular, erratic, and unpredictable. Air defense coverage appeared in short flashes, then disappeared again like phantoms. Infantry stayed under cover longer than planned, their morale sinking in the damp cellars and dugouts. The battlefield had not gone quiet. It had become cautious, and caution, under pressure, becomes another form of attrition, wearing down the mind before the body. The final count would later list personnel losses, damaged vehicles, air defense systems hit, fuel storage destroyed, and rear facilities disrupted. Those numbers matter to historians and generals, but they do not explain what happened inside the operation. The real effect was visible in the pauses. The convoy never reached the bridge. The radar did not stay on. The fuel did not arrive on schedule. The repair site was no longer hidden. The launcher moved too late. By the time the last drone feed cut out, Russian units across the sector were still holding positions. The line had not vanished. The defenses had not disappeared, but the system behind them was no longer moving cleanly. Every route had to be checked. Every radar activation had to be weighed against the crew's survival. Every relocation risked being watched by an unseen enemy. Every support site that responded to damage risked becoming the next target. The sky was no longer empty. It was the first layer of the operation, a ceiling of constant, lethal surveillance. This brings the tactical loop right back to the silent giant sitting at the heart of the network. The original pattern of routine, calculated hours earlier by the first reconnaissance flight, had finally isolated the main target the operators had been tracking through the smoke of the supply lines. Hidden beneath triple-layer netting on a reverse slope 22 kilometers deep, the crown jewel of the regional air defense net was forced to make its final move. This was a $25 million Tor-M2 short-range air defense system, a highly advanced mobile shield designed to protect entire divisions from precision weaponry. To survive the closing net of drones and artillery, the crew activated its tracking radar to clear their own escape corridor. It was the exact mistake the entire operation had been engineered to provoke, the culmination of a meticulously laid trap. The signature blossomed on the Ukrainian monitoring screens instantly, a brilliant electronic beacon in the dark. Two heavy FPV strike drones, pre-positioned in the dead space, dove straight through the canopy, their engines screaming as they reached terminal velocity. The dual-shaped charge warheads detonated directly against the vertical launch tubes and the primary radar array, transforming the $25 million system into a burning chassis of ruined electronics and twisted metal, leaving the airspace above completely, undeniably open.